morning. Welcome to the April 28th BCAG board meeting. If you would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ashley, could you call the roll?
Board Member Connolly?
Here.
Board Member Lucero? Board Member Ritter? Here. Board Member Killshoe?
Here.
Board Member Teeter?
Here.
Board Member Knuckles?
Here.
Board Member Kay Reynolds? Board Member Calderon?
Here.
Board Member C. Reynolds? Board Member Jones?
Here.
And Deborah Lucero's here, but I was told I couldn't participate today because I'm calling in from my car.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Would anyone like to pull anything from the consent agenda? None. Is there a motion for consent?
Move to approve consent agenda.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Moving on to items for action. Item number 7, approval of BCAG's overall work program and budget.
Members of the board, item 7 is a request to approve our 2022-23 overall work program and budget. Last month, I reviewed a draft of our 22-23 budget with the board of directors. Set time, not a lot of changes. We have added one additional work element 23-132, which is regional alternative fueling coordination. Only additional work element. We added that because we have a few items we're working with Caltrans, Yuba County, City of Marysville on to, one of which is to try to get the Highway 70 corridor designated as an alternative fuel corridor by the state. We're looking to try to get alternative fueling stations in Marysville, Oroville. There are some stations in Chico, so we also have a need to update the plug-in electric vehicle plan we did about 4 years ago, so we added that work element. Other than that, not a lot of changes with regard to elements. Overall, we have 24 work elements that we will be developing next fiscal year. We've done some slight modifications with the budget. It's about $6.3 million as outlined in the work program right now. Upon the board's approval, we will be submitting this to Caltrans, Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration for their approval as well. So with that, I'm happy to address any questions or comments board members might have.
Have questions?
I was just going to point out too, there's a lot of tables in this document, and I do that really kind of to appease Caltrans and Federal Highway Administration, but regarding like the work elements, page 16, table 2, kind of a work element description. If you're ever kind of looking at, what are all these activities we do, that table's a pretty good summary. It gives you a description as a federal requirement, state requirement, regional benefit, city, county planning, and so like reading the entire budget work plan, it gives you a good kind of summary of the work elements themselves and why we do that.
Is the one item that you said that was added, I think 122, that's not on the table or the document of the agenda, is it?
It is in the work program. It's in the final work
Oh,
program.
but not on that table, correct?
Yes, it is.
It is.
Yes, it should be. That's it. And the only other changes staff made is we do, again, after we submit the draft to Federal Highways, Caltrans, and Federal they provide comments. So I incorporated all their comments, which were very clear. So not a lot of changes from the original draft. The comments we received.
I saw someone charging their car and all
We wanted, I think we need to get there's some requirements on that corridor designation, and that I think it has to be a mile from the highway. To my understanding, there aren't stations that meet that requirement in Marysville and Oroville. So we'll be working, try to help them to get that important, since we've made a significant investment to the Highway 70 corridor. That's really kind of our major focus route in the region, getting help for people in the future that have electric cars or hydrogen fuel type cars, be able to more information along the 70 corridor.
No questions. Is there anyone in the public who would like to speak on this? Get any comments? Is there a motion?
Make a motion to approve.
We do a voice vote since no one is participating online. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Item number 8, approval of the Butte Regional Transit Service Plan and Budget. Sarah.
Morning, Board. As the owner and operator of Butte Regional Transit, BCAG is responsible for preparing the annual service plan and budget. Today, we're presenting the final budget for fiscal year 22-23. Similar to the BCAG budget, there haven't been any changes since we presented the draft budget last month. In summary, the final budget identifies a total operating budget of $11.4 million for both Beeline fixed route and paratransit. There is an increase in 5% from the prior fiscal year, mainly due to an increase in the transit services contract hourly rate, which is identified as purchase transportation, an increase in $96,000 in software license fees. This accommodates the cost of our new IT maintenance provider and vehicle maintenance equipment. There is an increase in $136,000 in fuel costs due to rising fuel prices. The regional transit facility increase of $54,000 as the building begins to age and maintenance costs increase. And as discussed last month, there is a decrease in our vehicle maintenance as our buses are newer and are requiring less maintenance. With our fares, there's a little bit more than a 15% increase in overall fares to account for increasing demand. This was adjusted after the third quarter report to reflect more current ridership, and Victoria will share a little bit more about this in the quarter 3 report. There's also an increase in around 22% of federal funding. This accounts for the American Rescue Plan and increased apportionments. And local TDA was decreased slightly. I think it's worth noting that the TDA apportionment to the cities, town, and county does remain greater than last fiscal year. And we are planning to still purchase 4 electric buses next year. I'll take any questions.
How much are those buses? $1 million each, is that right?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Just want to make sure everybody knew that.
They're around $1 million, and we also do need to buy chargers for each bus.
I'm sorry, say that again.
The buses each are $1 million, but we also will need to buy charging equipment for each bus, so.
I can't wait to ride on those $1 million buses.
Very nice.
Yes.
Other questions? Is there any public comments? Do we have a motion? Yes, to approve.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Item number 9, approval of public participation plan. Ron?
Good morning, Board. BCAG is required to review and update its public participation plan prior to development of its long-range regional transportation plan, sustainable community strategy. This same agenda item was last presented at the March board meeting. No changes have been made to the draft plan. Staff published a 45-day public review period prior to adopting the plan. Comprehensive outreach process was undertaken with various workshops and a Zoom meeting to allow the public to. Services were based on the entire regional transit fleet, newspaper and whatnot. Current draft is posted online at BCAG's website, a hard copy here. At the end of the day, very minor changes were made to the current 2019 plan to identify language that encourages alternative public outreach methods, like encouraging staff to go to farmers market or other, as well as using Zoom or remote types of meetings as acceptable outreach process. If no significant comments are received, staff recommends the board approve the public participation plan by resolution 2021-22. Resolution also authorizes staff to make any necessary minor technical corrections.
Thanks, Ron.
I'm curious, I appreciated the participation of BCAG in the long-range senior planning meeting this week, and I'm wondering, moving forward, if that's going to be one of the areas where we're going to be considering input in terms.
Is there any public comments received? None. Motion?
Second?
Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
That's as quiet as an electric button.
Those things are dangerous.
That's why I gotta put little cards in the wheel so you hear 'em.
I think you're right. I almost got ran over by a school bus the other day in Durham. They're coming.
Then we have one item for information, item 10, Butte Regional Transit, third quarter report.
Good morning, Board. Today we're presenting the key financial and statistical results for the third quarter of fiscal year 21-22. The attached tables present a summary of key financial and operation results for Beeline in this third quarter. The operations table presents a performance-based assessment in comparison to the same quarter of the prior fiscal year, and the financial data represents presentation compares the third quarter results to the annual budget and the prior fiscal year. The measures of revenue, expense, ridership, vehicle revenue hours, and passengers per vehicle revenue hour are broken down by 4 types: fixed route and paratransit, urban, and rural. This separation helps define where improvements are needed and or issues are taking place. And the fare box ratios for the quarter are presented for reference, as only annual ratios are required for the TDA compliance. Accidents and complaints, gauging safety, and customer satisfaction are all analyzed for the system as a whole. Again, the comparisons for this year and for this quarter are going back to last year, which was entirely impacted by COVID. And while the overall loss of fares continues to cause problems across the board in meeting fare box ratios, AB 90, which is passed by the California Assembly in June 2020, provided an exemption to the TDA requirement through last fiscal year, but then in July 2021, AB 149 was passed that extended the fare box requirement exemption through next fiscal year of 22-23.
Funding from the Federal CARES Act continues to help cover lost fare revenues during this time. And then it should be noted that though we're not meeting fare box requirements in any area, the ratios are all rising in all four modes of transit. So though ridership on the fixed route is increasing dramatically from last year, it's still only about half of what we saw from pre-pandemic. And if you can scroll up, please. There's this chart which shows exactly what ridership is doing. The first part of this chart in 2019, in 1920, those are normal fluctuations that account for Chico State ridership. That's a relatively normal thing where when Chico State is in session, we see a larger number than when Chico State is out of session. And then you can see very clearly when the shelter-in-place order happened and ridership dropped dramatically. The blue line that is at top is ridership as a whole. The red line that mirrors it very closely is Chico urban ridership. And then the green line at the bottom is what what the rural ridership is doing, which is ridership that's outside of Chico. So you can see that there's less dramatic fluctuations in that number, and that in February and March of this year, the last 2 months, things have steadily started to go up, although they're still quite down. For the rural fixed route, we have a PDA fare box ratio of 9.8% for the fiscal year so far, which is just below the 10% requirement. Ridership for the quarter was up 35.1% from the prior year quarter, and passenger fares and expenditures are about right where we expected them to be. Urban fixed route, it has a requirement of 20% fare box recovery, and it is currently at 11.2%. Ridership increased 64.8% compared to the same quarter of last year, and passenger fares were 111% of what we expected in the annual budget. The rural paratransit has a requirement of 10% of fare box recovery, and it is coming in at 6.6%. Ridership, 6.6%. Ridership was up 22.9% for the quarter, and passenger revenues for the quarter came in at 79% of budget. Expenditures for the service and the supplies are coming in at 54% of the annual budget, and the efficiency of the system is starting to move back up to 2.9 passengers per revenue hour. Before COVID and before the campfire, that number hovered around 3.1. So you can see the efficiency is it's a lot better, and it's back to where we would expect it to be system-wide. Urban paratransit also has a TDA fare box recovery ratio of 10%. It is coming in at 8%. Ridership was up 35% for the quarter, and passenger revenues came in at 92% of budget, which again is a great thing. Expenditures are only at 54% of the budgeted expectations, and the efficiency of this system is at 3.0 passengers per revenue hour. Overall, there were 3 preventable accidents in the quarter, and with 351,652 miles driven, so that's well within our acceptability range for safety. And there were 2 valid complaints for the quarter with 130,191 rides given.
Thank you for giving us that parameter of we're about half of what we were pre-pandemic. I'm just curious, do you know how that stacks up with the rest of the state's transit operators? As their passengers are coming back, are they about 50%? Are we doing as well as everyone else?
We're about average with everyone else. I haven't heard of any place that's back to where they were pre-pandemic yet, or anywhere close to that.
Probably for us too, the universities important here because as Maria said, they are our largest ridership group. Back in session now, granted, university down a little bit. Not every community think we're about average.
I think what you'll see, it really mirrors what our chart shows, and that in the urban areas, we're gonna see those big fluctuations across the state. But in those more rural areas where people still had to get to work and it was less dependent on, university ridership, that those are remaining relatively stable and not seeing such large differences month to month.
You wouldn't happen to have any numbers for April, would you? I'm just curious what high gas prices are doing. Did it go way up again this month?
I can check. We generally don't get the numbers for the month until the 10th of the following month. But I'd be happy to check to see where April is tracking right now when we get back to the office.
Historically, high gas prices have resulted in large increases in ridership for transit systems. I'm just curious if that's happening again.
Well, we are seeing increases. It's just, there was a 5% increase between February and March that we saw in ridership. But I can definitely take a look at what happened specifically in April to see how that trends.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I've got a question. So explain to me the TDA fare box ratio requirement. It sounds like it's when you say here it's 10%, we're below that. Is that bad?
Well, it's not good,
Okay.
but the California Assembly passed the bill that I mentioned earlier that waives that requirement. So the TDA has a requirement that we have to recoup a certain percentage of our costs depending on the type of service offered. And if we don't, then they will no longer give us funding to provide that service. So there are some steep penalties for repeatedly not meeting fare box. But the California State Assembly waived those penalties because they realized everyone across the state is in the same boat. No one's making fare box.
How long is that waiver in place, do you know?
At least till the end of next fiscal year 2022-23.
But typically, we have always exceeded that 10%, is that right?
We try our best to hover around it. We don't want to go too far above that required 10% or 20% for the urban fixed route, because that would show that we have customers and riders who are paying more than they need to in order to ride the bus.
We've never been penalized.
We've never been penalized.
We've certainly had periods where we've dropped below. It's 10% in the rural, 20% in the urban areas. And we've certainly had periods where we've dropped below that in the past, but we've never done it for consecutive periods.
Okay. So historically, we're in pretty good shape.
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question. Why do we, with the paratransit, look at the efficiency, but we don't look at that with the fixed route?
We look at that at the year end for the fixed route with efficiency. Is something that we do report to TDA. It's just for paratransit, we have exact numbers. We know exactly how many people rode. And for fixed route, it's more of an estimate.
Any other questions? Any public comments? This item was for information only. That brings us to item number 11. Members of the public may speak on anything not on the agenda. Anyone who'd like to speak? None. We are now adjourned. The next meeting will be Thursday, May 26th, here in the BCAG boardroom.
Record.
Yeah, I think
New record for Joe.
Yeah.